Going to Shrewsbury. A short story by Sarah Jewett. The train stopped at a way station with apparent unwillingness, and there was barely time for one elderly passenger to be hurried on board before a sudden jerk threw her almost off her unsteady old feet, and we moved on. At my first glance, I saw only a perturbed old countrywoman, laden with a large basket and a heavy bundle tied up in an old-fashioned bundle handkerchief. Then I discovered that she was a friend of mine, Mrs. Peet, who lived on a small farm, several miles from the village. She used to be renowned for good butter and fresh eggs and the earliest cowslip greens. In fact, she always made the most of her farm's slender resources. But it was some time since I had seen her drive by from market in her ancient, thorough-braced wagon. The brakeman followed her into the crowded car, also carrying a number of packages. I leaned forward and asked Mrs. Peet to sit by me. It was a great pleasure to see her again. The brakeman seemed relieved and smiled as he tried to put part of his burden into the rack overhead. But even the flowered carpet bag was much too large, and he explained that he would take care of everything at the end of the car. Mrs. Peet was not large herself, but with the big basket and the bundle handkerchief and some possessions of my own, we had very little spare room. "So this 'ere is what you call riding in the cars. Well, I do declare," said my friend as soon as she had recovered herself a little. She looked pale and as if she had been in tears, but there was the familiar gleam of good humour in her tired old eyes. "Where in the world are you going, Mrs. Peet?" I asked. "Can't be you ain't heard about me, dear," said she. "Well, the world's bigger than I used to think it was. I've broke up. Was the only thing to do. And I'm a-moving to Shrewsbury." "To Shrewsbury? Have you sold the farm?" I exclaimed with sorrow and surprise. Mrs. Peet was too old and too characteristic to be suddenly transplanted from her native soil. "Want mine? The place want?" Her pleasant face hardened slightly. "He was coaxed and over-persuaded into signing off before he was taken away. Isaiah, son of his sister that married old Josh Peet, come it over him about his being past work and how he'd do for him like an own son, and we owed him a little something. I'd paid off everything but that, and was fool enough to leave it till the last, on account of Isaiah's being a relation and not needing his pay much as some others did. It's hurt me to have the place fall into other hands. Some wanted me to go right to law, but it wouldn't be no use. Izzy is smarter and I be about them matters. You see, he's got my name on the paper too. He said it was something about being responsible for the taxes. We was scant of money, and I was wore out with watching and being broke of my rest. After my trying hard for rising 45 year to provide for being past work. Here I be, dear, here I be. I used to drive things smart, you remember, but we was fools enough in 72 to put about everything we had safe in the bank into that spool factory that come to nothing. But I tell you, I could 'a kept myself long's I lived if I could 'a held the place. I'd parted with most of the woodland if his eye had coveted it. He was welcome to that, 'cept what might keep me in Ovenwood. I've always desired to travel and see something of the world, but I've got the chance now when I don't value it no great." "Shrewsbury is a busy, pleasant place," I ventured to say by way of comfort, though my heart was filled with rage at the trickery of Isaiah Peet, who had always looked like a fox and behaved like one. "Shrewsbury's been held up considerable for me to smile at," said the poor old soul. "But I tell you, dear, it's hard to go and live 22 miles from where you've always had your home and friends. It may divert me, but it won't be home. You might as well set out one of my old apple trees on the beach so I could see the waves come in. There wouldn't be no pleas to it." "Where are you going to live in Shrewsbury?" I asked presently. "I don't expect to stop long, dear creature. I'm most 76-year-old, and Mrs. Peet turned to look at me with pathetic amusement in her honest, wrinkled face. "I said right out to Isaiah before a roomful of the neighbours that I expected it of him to get me home and bury me when my time come, and do it respectable. But I wanted to earn my living, if it was so I could till then. He'd made sly talk, you see, about my electing to leave the farm and go long some of my own folks. But," and she whispered this carefully, "he didn't give me no chance to stay there without hurting my pride and depending on him. I ain't said that to many folks, but all must have suspected. A good sight on 'em's had money of Isaiah, though, and they don't like to do nothing but take his part and be pretty soft-spoken, fear it'll get to his ears. Well, well, dear, we'll let it be bygones and not think of it no more. But I saw the great tears roll slowly down her cheeks, and she pulled her bonnet forward impatiently and looked the other way. There looks to be plenty of good farming land in this part of the country, she said a minute later. Where be we now? See them handsome farm buildings. He must be a well-off man. But I had to tell my companion that we were still within the borders of the old town where we had both been born. Mrs. Peet gave a pleased little laugh like a girl. I'm expecting Shrewsbury to pop up any minute. I'm feared to be carried right by. I warn't never aboard of the cars before, but I've so often thought about him. I don't know, but it seems natural. Ain't it just like flying through the air? I can't catch holt to see nothing. Land. And here's my old cat going too, and never mistrusting. I ain't told you that I'd fetched her. Is she in that basket? I inquired with interest. Yes, dear. Truth was, I calculated to have her put out of the misery of moving, and spoke to one of the Barnes boys, and he promised me all fair, but he warn't there in season, and I kind of made excuse to myself to fetch her along. She's an old creature like me, and I can make shift to keep her some way or nother. There's probably mice where we're going, and she's a proper mouser that can about keep herself if there's any sort of chance. 'Twill be something a home to see her going and coming, but I expect we're both on us going to miss our old haunts. I'd love to know what kind of mousing there's going to be for me. You mustn't worry, I answered with all the bravery and assurance that I could muster. Your niece will be thankful to have you with her. Is she one of Mrs. Wynn's daughters? Oh, no, they ain't able. It's Sister Whalen's daughter Isabella that married the overseer of the Gret carriage shop. I ain't seen her since just after she was married, but I turned to her first because I knew she was best able to have me. And then I can see just how the other girls is situated and make me some kind of a plot. I wrote to Isabella, though she is ambitious, and said 'twas so I'd got to ask to come and make her a visit, and she wrote back she would be glad to have me. But she didn't write right off, and her letter was scented up dreadful strong with some sort of essence, and I don't feel heartened about no great of a welcome. But there, I've got eyes, and I can see how it is when I get where it is. Sister Wynn's gals ain't married, and they've always boarded and worked in the shop on trimmings. Isabella's well off. She had some means from her father's sister. I thought it all over by night and day, and I recalled that our folks kept Sister Whalen's folks all one winter, when he'd failed up and got into trouble. I'm reckoning on sending over tonight and getting the Wynn gals to come and see me and advise. Perhaps some on 'em may know of somebody that'll take me for what help I can give about house, or some clever folks that have been looking for a smart cat anyways. No, I don't knows. I could let her go to strangers. There was 2 or 3 of the folks round home that acted real warm-hearted towards me and urged me to come and winter with 'em, continued the exile. And this morning I wished I'd agreed to. It was so hard to break away, but now it's done I feel more'n ever it's best. I couldn't bear to live right in sight of the old place, and come spring I shouldn't prove of nothing as I undertakes to do with the land. Oh, dear sakes, now it comes hard with me not to have had no child'n. When I was young and working hard and into everything, I felt kind of free and superior to them that was so blessed, and their houses cluttered up from morning till night. But I tell ye it comes home to me now. I'd be most willing to own to even Isaiah means he is. But I tell ye I'd took it out of him 'fore he was a grown man if there had been any virtue in cowhiding of him. Folks don't look like wild creators for nothing. Isaiah's got fox blood in him, and perhaps it is his misfortune. His own mother always favoured the looks of an old fox, true's the world. She was a poor tool, a poor tool. I'd a knows we ought to blame him same's we do. I've always been a master-proud woman if I was riz among the pastures, Mrs. Peet added half to herself. There was no use in saying much to her. She was conscious of little beside her own thoughts and the smouldering excitement caused by this great crisis in her simple existence. Yet the atmosphere of her loneliness, uncertainty, and sorrow was so touching that after scolding again at her nephew's treachery, and finding the tears come fast to my eyes as she talked, I looked intently out of the car window and tried to think what could be done for the poor soul. She was one of the old-time people, and I hated to have her go away. But even if she could keep her home, she would soon be too feeble to live there alone, and some definite plan must be made for her comfort. Farms in that neighbourhood were not valuable, Perhaps through the agency of the law and quite in secret, Isaiah Peet could be forced to give up his unrighteous claim. Perhaps, too, the Wynne girls, who were really no longer young, might have saved something and would come home again. But it was easy to make such pictures in one's mind, and I must do what I could through other people, for I was just leaving home for a long time. I wondered sadly about Mrs. Peet's future, and the ambitious Isabella, and the favourite sister Wynne's daughters, to whom with all their kindliness of heart, the care of so old and perhaps so dependent an aunt might seem impossible. The truth about life in Shrewsbury would soon be known. More than half the short journey was already past. To my great pleasure, my fellow traveller now began to forget her own troubles in looking about her. She was an alert, quickly interested old soul, and this was a bit of neutral ground between the farm and Shrewsbury, where she was unattached and irresponsible. She had lived through the last tragic moments of her old life, and felt a certain relief, and Shrewsbury might be as far away as the other side of the Rocky Mountains for all the consciousness she had of its real existence. She was simply a traveller for the time being, and began to comment with delicious phrases and shrewd understanding of human nature on 2 or 3 persons near us who attracted her attention. "Where do you suppose they be all going?" she asked contemptuously. "There ain't none on 'em but what looks kind of respectable. I'll warrant they've left work to home they'd ought to be doing. I knowed, if ever I stopped to think, that cars was hived full of folks and want run to and fro for nothing. But these can't be quite up to the average, be they? Some on 'em's real thrifeless. Guess they've been shoved out of the last place and going to try the next one. Like me, I suppose you'll want to say. Just see that flaunting old creature that looks like a stopped clock. There, everybody can't be a one-goodness, even preachers." I was glad to have Mrs. Peet amused, and we were as cheerful as we could be for a few minutes. She said earnestly that she hoped to be forgiven for such talk, but there were some kinds of folks in the cars that she never had seen before. But when the conductor came to take her ticket, she relapsed into her first state of mind and was at a loss. "You'll have to look after me, dear, when we get to Shrewsbury," she said, after we had spent some distracted moments in hunting for the ticket, and the cat had almost escaped from the basket, and the bundle handkerchief had become untied and all its miscellaneous contents scattered about our laps and the floor. It was a touching collection of the last odds and ends of Mrs. Peet's housekeeping. Some battered books and singed holders for flat irons, and the faded little shoulder shawl that I had seen her wear many a day about her bent shoulders. There were her old tin matchbox spilling all its matches, and a goose wing for brushing up ashes, and her much-thumbed Levitt's almanac. It was most pathetic to see these poor trifles out of their places. At last the ticket was found in her left-hand woolen glove, where her stiff, work-worn hand had grown used to the feeling of it. "I shouldn't wonder now if I come to like living over to Shrewsbury first rate," she insisted, turning to me with a hopeful, eager look to see if I differed. "You see, it won't be so tough for me as if I hadn't always felt it lurking within me to go off some day or nother and see how other folks did things. I do know but what the Wynne gals have laid up something sufficient for us to take a house, with the little mite I've got by me. I might keep house for us all, 'stead of boarding round in other folks' houses. That I ain't never been demeaned to, but I dare say I should find it pleasant in some ways. Town folks has got the upper hand of country folks, but with all their work and pride they can't make a dandelion. I don't know the times when I've set out to wash Monday mornings and tied out the line betwixt the old pucker pear tree and the corner of the barn, and thought, here I be with the same kind of week's work right over again. I'd wonder kind of first if I couldn't get out of it no ways, and now here I be out of it, and an uprooted a creature never stood on the earth. Just as I got to feel I had something ahead come that spool factory business. There. You know he never was a four-handed man. His health was slim, and he got discouraged pretty nigh before ever he begun. I hope he don't know I'm turned out of the old place. Is I as well off? He'll do the right thing by ye, says he. But my, I turned hot all over when I found out what I'd put my name to. Me that had always been counted a smart woman. I did undertake to read it over, but I couldn't sense it. I've told all the folks so when they laid it off onto me some, but handwriting is awful tedious reading, and my head felt that day as if the works was gone. I ain't going to sag on to nobody, she assured me eagerly as the train rushed along. I've got more work in me now than folks expects at my age. I may be considerable use to Isabella. She's got a family and I'll take right holt in the kitchen or with the little gals. She had 4 on 'em last I heard. Isabella was never one that liked housework. Little gals. I do know now but what they must be about grown. Time does slip away so. I expect I shall look outlandish to 'em. But there, everybody knows me to home and nobody knows me to Shrewsbury. It won't make a mite o' difference if I take holt willin'. I hoped, as I looked at Mrs. Peet, that she would never be persuaded to cast off the gathered brown silk bonnet and the plain shawl that she had worn so many years. But Isabella might think it best to insist upon more modern fashions. Mrs. Peet suggested, as if it were a matter of little consequence, that she had kept it in mind to buy some mourning. But there were other things to be thought of first, and so she had let it go until winter, anyway, or until she should be fairly settled in Shrewsbury. "Are your nieces expecting you by this train?" I was moved to ask, though with all the good soul's ready talk and appealing manner, I could hardly believe that she was going to Shrewsbury for more than a visit. It seemed as if she must return to the worn old farmhouse over by the sheeplands. She answered that one of the Barnes boys had written a letter for her the day before, and there was evidently little uneasiness about her first reception. We drew near the junction where I must leave her within a mile of the town. The cat was clawing indignantly at the basket, and her mistress grew as impatient of the car. She began to look very old and pale, my poor fellow traveller, and said that she felt dizzy, going so fast. Presently the friendly, red-cheeked young brakeman came along, bringing the carpet bag and other possessions, and insisted upon taking the alarmed cat beside in spite of an aggressive paw that had worked its way through the wicker prison. Mrs. Peet watched her goods disappear with suspicious eyes, and clutched her bundle handkerchief as if it might be all that she could save. Then she anxiously got to her feet, much too soon, and when I said goodbye to her at the car door she was ready to cry. I pointed to the car which she was to take next on the branch line of railway, and I assured her that it was only a few minutes' ride to Shrewsbury, and that I felt certain she would find somebody waiting. The sight of that worn, thin figure adventuring alone across the platform gave my heart a sharp pang as the train carried me away. Some of the passengers who sat near asked me about my old friend with great sympathy after she had gone. There was a look of tragedy about her, and indeed it had been impossible not to get a good deal of her history. As she talked straight on in the same tone, when we stopped at a station, as if the train were going at full speed, and some of her remarks caused pity and amusements by turns. At the last minute she said, with deep self-reproach, "Why, I haven't asked a word about your folks, but you'd ought to excuse such an old stray hen as I be." In the spring I was driving by on what the old people of my native town call the Sheeplands Road, and the sight of Mrs. Peet's former home brought our former journey freshly to my mind. I had last heard from her just after she got to Shrewsbury when she had sent me a message. "Have you ever heard how she got on?" I eagerly asked my companion. "Didn't I tell you that I met her in Shrewsbury High Street one day?" I was answered. "She seemed perfectly delighted with everything. Her nieces have laid up a good bit of money, and are soon to leave the mill and most thankful to have old Mrs. Peet with them. Somebody told me that they wished to buy the farm here and come back to live, but she wouldn't hear of it, and thought they would miss too many privileges. She has been going to concerts and lectures this winter, and insists that Isaiah did her a good turn." We both laughed. My own heart was filled with joy, for the uncertain, lonely face of this homeless old woman had often haunted me. The rain-blackened little house did certainly look dreary, and a whole lifetime of patient toil had left few traces. The pucker pear tree was in full bloom, however, and gave a welcome gaiety to the deserted dooryard. A little way beyond we met Isaiah Peet, the prosperous moneylender, who had cheated the old woman of her own. I fancied that he looked somewhat ashamed, as he recognised us. To my surprise, he stopped his horse in most social fashion. "Old Aunt Peet's passed away," he informed me briskly. "She had a shock and went right off sudden yesterday forenoon. I'm about now tending to the funeral 'rangements. She's been extry smart, they say, all winter, out to meeting last Sabbath. Never enjoyed herself so complete as she has this past month. She'd been a very hard-working woman. Her folks was glad to have her there and give her every attention. The place here never was good for nothing. The old gentleman. Uncle, he wore hisself out trying to make a living off from it. There was an ostentatious sympathy and half-suppressed excitement from bad news which were quite lost upon us, and we did not linger to hear much more. It seemed to me as if I had known Mrs. Peet better than anyone else had known her. I had counted upon seeing her again, and hearing her own account of Shrewsbury life, its pleasures and its limitations. I wondered what had become of the cat and the contents of the faded bundle handkerchief.